Joining us right now, Texans Radio, it's Texans General Manager Nick Caserio. Nick, Happy New Year. Great to have you with us. Final week of the season. How do you feel going into the final tilt?
Yeah, good morning. Good to be here. Happy New Year. Good opportunity for our team to, try to make some progress in their division against a really good team. So a lot of respect and admiration for what Tennessee, what Mike and John have done and put together. Division champs, so certainly be a challenge for us. They'll present some challenges that are a little bit different than San Francisco posed, but a good opportunity for our team to try to have a good week, and go out on a positive note.
Nick, what are your thoughts about Sunday against San Francisco? You got a 7-3 lead at half. It's 10-7 going to the fourth quarter. You're standing up going toe-to-toe physically with one of the tougher teams in the league. What were your overall thoughts from Sunday?
Yeah, had some opportunities. Kept the game kind of competitive there for a little bit. It was close in the fourth quarter. I think it was 10-7 in the fourth quarter. Really the series ended up being a difference, get knocked out of field goal range to a degree on third down or missed a field goal and then turn around and give out the big play and a touchdown. So it goes from a 3-score game to a 10-point game in, fairly short order of time. So, just emphasize the importance of execution, situational football, third down, a kicking game, and then not giving up big plays, which those elements will certainly show up. This week with Tennessee is a really good situational team, third down in the red area. They're among the top 10 in the league. So, it comes down to execution, a critical situation when it matters. And, there's a handful of plays that San Francisco was able to execute. And as a result, they ended up victorious.
And you did get that execution in the first half at times, Nick, when you had the pick and you were able to drive 80 yards, get the touchdown, get the ball back. I know you couldn't do anything with it or didn't do anything with it, but that was good to see the Texans take the lead and able to get a 3-and-out after that.
Yeah, there were enough good things in the game at different points. That series that you alluded to that you mentioned, I'd say a pretty good awareness play by Desmond where they tried to sneak the tight end out, on the weak side, and just kind of stay disciplined in zone coverage. I think Lance probably thought the tight end was behind Desmond. Desmond just carried, stayed, underneath the receiver in his zone and made a good play in the ball, which Desmond, one of his strengths are his hands and his ball skills, always has been. So, anytime you take the ball away from the opposing team, that's always a good thing. So turnovers are important. Turnovers are part of the game. We gave them one there a little bit, whatever point that was. So, those little things certainly matter. They're going to matter this week, just as they have just about every other week here in every game.
Nick, you mentioned a little while ago talking about Tennessee and how good they were in situational football. By the way, my wife had a comment the other night about situational football that blew my mind. She said, why isn't everything in football situational, which was true. But I had to try and explain to her specific situations. You mentioned third down, red zone. Teams that you have seen win championships or be very, very good. Which situational aspect were they the best at, and which one do you want the Texans to be the best at? If you were going to pick one, I know you want to be best at all, but if there was one that's most important, which situation would you want to be the best at?
No, it's an interesting thought. Ultimately, the game comes down to points. So where do points happen? They happen in a red area. So your ability to execute in a red area from the 10 and in, once you get the ball to the 20-yard line, the percentages are fairly high in a field goal. So as you move a little bit closer to the end zone, the difference in, the field goal versus the touchdowns or the 4-point plays. So, your red zone execution is important. Teams that can have success running the football into the end zone, that usually kind of gives them a little bit of an advantage. It's always hard to throw the ball. I mean, the hardest situation for any team to be in is offensively, at least 3rd and 8 or 9, 3rd and goal from the 8 or 9. That's a hard play. So, but I'd say red zone, points correlate to winning, so between red area offense and or defense, third down is just a way to continue drives throughout the course of the game. But I think the point that your wife actually made, each play is a different situation. You go from first down to second down to third down, first down to second down to first down, and you just have to adjust to the flow of the game as you go. So I would say that's why those critical situations, games usually come down to who executes best in a red area, who can execute on third down to keep drives going, who can execute in the 2-minute situations, which a lot of those are either end of half and then obviously the end of game situation. And then the turnover ratio or turnover factor, your ability to take the ball away and not give it to the other team, those all correlate to winning probably as much as anything. So all situations are important. They all matter. You never know which one is going to ultimately be the determining factor in the game, but you certainly have to have a heightened awareness, especially in a red area and especially on third down, because those end up being probably some of the more critical plays, and there's less of them during the course of the game. So your ability to have success on whichever side of the ball you're on, is a big factor.
Nick, it feels like we see more people going for two, and it feels like we see more people going for it on fourth down. I know situations do depend on that as well, but by your estimation, when did this become more frequent, the going for it on fourth down in particular?
It's a good question, Mark. I'd say over the last maybe 2 to 4 years. So I think, what's happened, there's been a little bit more information that maybe teams are utilizing or incorporating into their sort of game planning and game management. It's interesting. We were kind of looking at this going into our game on Saturday. Call it the plus 40 to plus 30 area of the field is probably where you've seen the most increase or uptick in teams kind of having to make a decision about when to or when not to go for it on fourth down, whether to kick the field goal, whether to punt. And I'd say the kind of 36 to 30 area is a pretty premium real estate area because it forces you to kind of think. So you factor that in, then you factor into, especially when you get late into the game in the fourth quarter, once you get under about, call it maybe 9 or 10 minutes, I mean, realistically, you're going to have about 4 possessions, 2 on each side of the ball. So how do you handle those situations? What goes into your thought process? What's a score in the game? I mean, so I would say the whole fourth down discussion looks like over the last few years, you have some coaches that are a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more inclined to sort of not take risk, but it's more of a calculated risk and a decision because if you give the ball up at that point, how much do you actually lose or gain? So I'd say every staff, every coach has a different philosophy, and you just have to stay true to whatever you believe in.
Nick, the season ends on Sunday. Everybody knows that, but your to-do list, I don't want to say it ends with the season begins with a new one. It's just probably a really long to-do list that you get into. But what are some of the first 2 things you've got to do Monday when you wake up, come into the office, season's over? What do you start doing at that particular point to get ready for 2022 and especially this offseason?
Yeah, the big thing, you really just after the game on Sunday, you kind of have an end point. So your sort of regular season flow, some of the things that go into the, weekly decision making, who's on the roster, who's off the roster, who's at the game, who's inactive. You don't have to worry about that. But in terms of the overall team building and player acquisition and kind of planning, it's fairly fluid. You just kind of have an end point. So now that the season is over, you have some players that are not under contract come the middle of March, whenever the league year starts. So you have to look at, I would say, your entire roster, who you have under contract, who's not under contract. I would say some of the reserve future players you'll see, they'll be, the teams aren't playing, they'll sign their reserve future players, which essentially they're free agent players that, you plan on taking to the offseason program, taking in a training camp, understanding that, a player that you sign or draft, or you sign after the draft could maybe offset that player. So I would say that's a factor where you are kind of on injured players relative to who's going to need offseason surgery and just the timeline associated with that. So I would say from a roster standpoint, those are some of the things that are going to come into play. And then really from I would say coaching staff standpoint, schematically, just going back and kind of reviewing everything that has happened. I mean, there are certain things that I would say the Houston Texans this year, we've done fairly well. And there's other areas, quite frankly, we haven't done very well at all. So going back and evaluating those situations, kind of what happened, how do we prepare, how do we practice it? Those are some of the things I'd say over the next month or so that, your coaching staff is going to have to really dig into. And then kind of once you get through that, then February, March, you start to transition into sort of the draft preparation, at least from other members of the staff. Our scouting staff has been immersed in that, for a long time here. And then really the next checkpoint on the calendar, the start of the league year is March 18th or whatever it is, 4:00. So there's certain players that are, are going to be available. So there's a lot of work between, let's call it now and then, that you're going to go into. So projecting, salary size, what that potentially player is going to make on the open market. Is this someone we're going to be interested in? Can we afford that contract? How does he fit within the construct of what we're trying to do? Who's coming back? So I mean, it's just a continuation and ongoing. I think the season just kind of gives you an end point, but quite frankly, you're probably as busy or put as much time and effort into what happens after the season as you do during the season.
Nick, you signed so many players last offseason, so many free agents, and I know this has to be an ongoing process, but take us through a little bit about how you evaluate potential free agents on other teams, maybe during the season versus right after, because it's not like you can just start gathering information mid-January. I know you've probably been doing that all along, but then you get a sort of crunch time element leading into free agency as you have to make a decision whether you're going to pursue them or not.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So, I mean, just one of the things just in terms of my process. So every team that we played, I mean, I've written up every player on their roster and color coded the players that we know are going to be free agents and or restricted free agents, which I would say that market is certainly become less. But so as you prepare for a team or prepare for an opponent, you're watching how they're playing during the year within their scheme, what they're doing for their team, but their strengths, their weaknesses, and kind of maybe how you would project that player into your system if you had the opportunity to sign him. So to your point, there's certainly work that's been done already. And then, we'll gather kind of collectively as a personnel department, and, you'll go through, I would say, a general stacking process like you would do for a draft board. So look at the position, look at who's available, arrange them according to grade, highest to lowest. And then once you have the grade of the player, what you feel his value is to your team, then, okay, what's the projected contract commensurate with that player? And, there might be a gap, there might be a mismatch. Let's say we grade a player at a certain level, but his contract is projected to be higher. Well, okay, maybe that's not a player that, quite frankly, we should be targeting because there's a little bit of a gap. Now, if we have identified a certain player, here's what we think his value is, here's his grade, here's what we think his role is on a team, here's what his projected market is, understanding that could change because it only takes one team to change that once they get into free agency, then to say, okay, like here's kind of a target group. And then you start to maybe do some research gathering behind the scenes. And, you can't really talk to their agents or representatives until you get to March anyway. So, I mean, that's a sort of a separate bucket once you get into that. So, there's certainly a lot of planning that goes into it, but you have an idea of who's going to be available, not only on the opposing teams, but then also league wide. Probably need to spend a little bit more time just on the other players on other teams league wide that we haven't played this year, just so we make sure we know who they are. So there's a lot of components. There's a lot of things that go into it. But, whenever the new league year begins, hopefully we'll be ready to go. And we've identified some players that we feel, A, we can afford, and B, that we think can help us in a particular role.
Nick, how important is the process between your scouts having seen college players for sometimes 2-3 years and then your coaching staff getting involved in the process who haven't seen these guys probably other than maybe watching a game on TV, and having a synergy between the two groups to make sure that you are given the best information, be able to stack your board, et cetera? How important is that process of merging the scouts with the coaches to get that process taken care of?
Yeah, no, it's important, and it's a little bit of a double-edged sword too, because, you've invested a lot of time kind of, on a personnel side and scouting side. And then, we try to be, I would say, very purposeful about which players we give our coaches. Quite frankly, I don't think it's very productive just to give them a list of, 75 players at each position and say, okay, go evaluate those players and tell us what you think. I mean, it's kind of counterproductive. It's not really a good use of their time. So we try to take the big picture, maybe shrink it down a little bit, and then be able to provide the coaches and say, all right, here's these group of however many players it is. Take a look at them, what's your evaluation of the player, about how you see them. And quite frankly, that's kind of my role in this, is I can kind of be, the synergistic link between the coaching staff and the personnel staff. Just ultimately that's, one of the reasons that I'm here, to kind of help bridge that gap a little bit, just understanding what we're doing, on a week to week basis. So, and then also where you gather the information from and how you get that, as depending on who you speak to, and, they could say one thing to a coach that they've said something different to a member of your scouting staff. So, okay, what's the right information? Where's the truth lies? So I would say, there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of conversation, and ultimately, we're not going to bring a player in that, there's a disconnect on the player. If we feel that, one group maybe feels a certain way and the other group feels a certain way, well, in the end, it's got to make a decision, is it worth it or not? So, we want players that fit what we're trying to do, that everybody has the confidence in, and they're actually going to invest the time and the effort and the energy in that player when they get here. Because if you do it the other way, you're ultimately going to run into problems.
Sunday is Fan Appreciation Day, Nick, and with the Texans in recent weeks, you had success against the Chargers, the Jags, parts of the Seattle game, parts of the 49er game. Is that a good example of what you want to show the fans? Hey, this is what we've been working on. These are some of the results so far, but you got a long way to go. How would you phrase that for us?
Yeah, I would say the fan support really throughout the season has been great. I mean, once you get in, whether it's a New England game, you get into the Jets game, the Chargers game you mentioned, like it's been pretty loud in the stadium. So I think, we've had support, from the fans and, from the area, which is quite frankly, awesome to see. I think they believe in the things that we're trying to do, and you're starting to see that come to fruition on the field. Understand we have a long runway in front of us and a long way to go, but, when you play at home and you get the support, from your fans, it brings a little juice, brings a little energy. I know the players sort of feed off of that. So, again, when we took over, I mean, we were trying to put together the best team as possible that, not only the organization, but the city can be proud of. And, unfortunately, the wins and losses are what they are. But, we realized that there was going to be a lot of work and a lot of time, a lot of effort that's gone into this. And, like we've talked about during the season, there's been a lot of things that have gone on kind of underneath the surface. We've made a lot of progress, and I think if you continue to do those things, then ultimately it'll translate into more success, which is more wins and losses on the field, which is ultimately the fans just, they want to be a part of a team that wins and has success and does it the right way. So that's our responsibility, and we're going to try to continue to do that as we build this thing out.
Nick, it's week 18. We've never had a week 18 in the regular season before with a 17th game. Has that made a difference at all, a material difference at all, or just another week in the process?
Yeah, I'd say probably a little bit more of another week in the process. In terms of your preparation, in terms of what the players go through, your routine, kind of how you schedule your week and what you go through during the course of the week, it's not going to change. It's just an additional week. But, we've tried to do a good job. The players have done a good job sort of managing themselves and managing their bodies and understanding what they have to do at different points of the week. So, just pushes everything, I would say, end of the season into the off season a little bit further out. But, ultimately we have to go out there and play and perform. That's what we're paid to do, what our responsibility is. So we're going to put everything into this week like we have every other week. We're not going to cut any corners. We're going to have a good attitude. We're going to work hard. We're going to go out there. We're going to try to prepare for a really good team. And ultimately go out there and try to play a good football game on Sunday.
Nick, we really appreciate all the weekly visits. Thank you so much. I mean, everyone's gotten so much out of these. So thank you for visiting with us each week here on Texans Radio and Video.
No, I really enjoy the opportunity, enjoy the conversation. Really enjoy doing it on a week-to-week basis, and look forward to spending a little bit more time together in the off season when we get the opportunity.
All right. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thanks, guys.